So today we have Dr. Vincent Garin, crop modeler IRD from IRD France. So welcome, sir. Uh, Before starting of the lecture, I find myself privileged to introduce Dr. Vincent Garin to all the participants. He earned his degree in Masters in Statistics from the University of Geneva, Switzerland in 2013. Around that time, he developed an interest for agriculture. So he continued his career by doing a PhD in quantitative genetics at University of Wageningen, Netherlands. He worked in the development of statistical methodology for genetic analysis of multi-parent populations. His biggest interest is in the development of agriculture solutions for smallholder farmers. Therefore, after his PhD, he joined international organizations such as ICRISAT and CIRAD, where he continued to work in modeling with various applications like environment characterization, multi-environment genetic analysis, and technology extension. So today his title will be Precision Agriculture Driven by Knowledge of Environment, TPE Characterization. So Dr. Vincent Garin, welcome you all again. And please proceed with your lecture. The participants are eagerly waiting to hear from you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I hope that everyone can hear me well.
Yeah, definitely. You are quite audible, clear, and all the best to you, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Thank you for the introductions. Greeting from Montpellier. I'm actually based in France, and as the introduction person, as Sony has said, I've spent some of my time in ICRISAT in India to work on some topic that were mentioned, so like the characterization of environment, and I will be happy to present you some element of this work, especially some application on pearl millet. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if it's work. I have a double screen, so I share the whole screen. Yeah, I hope that everyone can see the presentation.
Yes, sir. It is visible.
It is visible, and then let me take the laser pointer. Okay, so thanks a lot for joining and to give me the opportunity to share some of the result that we have developed with the group of ICRISAT, so with the crop physiology team, and more specifically to talk about target population of environment characterization, which is a quite important topic, especially if we think about that the environment is changing with climate change, and yes, to adapt everything, or let's say any types of solution that we want to put in place in agriculture, we need to have this good knowledge of environment. So just to start a quick plan. So first, I'm going to talk about the importance of environment, especially for breeding. I'm myself a quantitative geneticist, so I have a background for statistics in breeding, so I can make the link between importance of environment and breeding. Then I will mention what kind of data we can find nowadays to characterize the environment, some observed data and also some synthetic data about the weather. I'm going to develop a bit what is the concept of crop model. I think it's pretty interesting. Maybe some of you already have some knowledge about that, but I will give a bit of overview about what is crop model and also what kind of application we can have with crop model. And after introducing the crop model, I'm going to focus on one specific application of the crop model, which is the TPE determination, which is basically a characterization of the environment. And as I mentioned, I worked in pearl millet, so I'm going to give illustration for pearl millet cultivation in India. And to finish, once we have defined this TPE, what can we do with this type of information? So I move. So yes, let's start by a small bit of concept. I try to not be too conceptual, but it's good at the beginning to make few definition. So as I mentioned, I find interesting to introduce the importance of the environment by going through what is selection. So probably some of you are breeder or you are working with breeder, and it's not a big discovery for you that breeding activity, we have to generate some diversity, we develop some population, we have to select some individual with desirable characteristic, and then after generation, so we select those individuals that are a bit outstanding, and then we continue to advance the population by crossing it. And from here, you can see that in the distribution, we select the best individual, we push them to a next generation, which means that we try to increase what we call the genetic gain of our population. We try to increase the genetic characteristic of our population. And so this is connected to the distribution of the phenotypic variability, or how we can model the phenotype of a plant. In quantitative genetics, we have a basic equation that says that the phenotype actually is a product of a genetic expression, the interaction of this genetic expression with the environment, and some error that is due to the measurement error that we are doing. And if we translate this in terms of variance of variability, we have that the variance of the phenotypic expression is a function of the genetic variance, the genotype by environment variance, and the error variance. And so when we have stated this equation, we can define what we call the heritability. Heritability is the proportion of the genetic variance of a population that can be explained by the genetic difference. And this proportion, so this genetic, let's say this genetic variance, we can do a ratio with the rest of the phenotypic variance to evaluate how much of the variation of the phenotype is expressed by only difference between genotype. And here we see that on the bottom of the expression, we have the genetic by environment variance. So you start to see that the environment is introduced here, which means that the heritability depends on the environment. So the heritability can be understood as what breeder can manipulate to advance their population. And this is inversely proportional to the amount of variation that is due to the environment. And so if we go back to those small equations, so this is the last slide where we have a bit more concept and equation. In selection, we have something that is called this breeder equation. And the breeder equation says that the genetic gain, which is this part here, is proportional to the heritability times the selection intensity. And if we try to illustrate this expression here, and we try to relate that to the heritability, in a situation where we have a full heritability, which means that the difference of selection between the average of the population and the individual we select is everything is translated to the next generation, it means that we have a heritability of 1. So everything that is translated to the next generation is due to differences in genetics. You can have here a small illustration. If everything is due to the difference of genetics, let's assume we have one environment, environment 1, and another environment, environment 2, and you see the expression of the genotype, for example, genotype 1 and genotype 2 is exactly the same in the two environments, which means that here it's a situation, it's an abstract situation when environment has no effect on the genetic expression. ideal situation for the breeder because it means that everything you select, you find in your next generation. On the other hand, you have the other extreme case, which is this one, where actually the expression of the genotype is totally controlled by the environment. For example, you can see here that the let's see here the G1 plant in the first environment is small, but in the second environment is big. The G2 is big in the first environment, but small in the second environment, which means that here there is a very strong effect of the environment. And it means that this term here is large, which means that the heritability is small. And so it makes the life of the breeder complex because it's difficult to translate something from one generation to the other, especially when we change of environment. So this is to say that in plant, especially in plant, this concept of heritability and the influence of environment is very important. For example, in animals, there is, compared to plant, not that much effect of the environment. We generally have, for most of the characteristic, heritability of 0.7, which means that most of the difference between organisms is due to the genetics. Why in plants, they are much more plastic, or they are much more influenced by the environment. And here we potentially have more what we call G by E, influenced by the environment, with heritability that can really vary from very small to very large. There are also traits that are purely genetically determined. And so it means that it's very important to characterize what is the genotype by environment pattern. There are different configurations. For example, when there is no genotype by environment variation, we have that in the selection environment and in target environment, the difference are the same. The two genotype, they keep the same difference. We have a situation that we call divergence, which involves moderate genotype by environment variance, which is similar to another situation that is convergence. So here you see from one environment to the other, there are some small change, but the rank is not changed. G2 is always lower than G1. And we have the most extreme case that is called crossover. In that case, we have the strong genotype by environment variance. So you have an inversion of the ranking between the two genotypes. So, and here you see progressively, I'm coming back to the topic of today of the TPE, which is the characterization of the environment. And why it is important? Because in particular for selection, we want to be sure that we do a selection for a target environment. So we are developing some solution for a specific environment, which is called the target environment. And we want to be sure that when we do the selection, the plant experience the same condition to be as much as possible in this type of situation where the environment influence is not too strong. So we are certain that we keep the difference between what we are selecting here and what is going to be used, for example, by the farmers in another location. So it's very important to know that we have uniform environment because at least for selection, they help. The counterexample of this is, for example, if we do a selection in an environment that is very different from the target, for example, if we assume that the selection environment is this second environment and we select for this one, here there is much more risk that there is some crossover. There is a strong influence of the environment. And so this type of situation, we want to avoid them as much as possible because, for example, in terms of selection, if we think in terms of genetic gain, we are going to decrease the efficiency of what we are doing. So this leads us to what is the important question of this presentation, which is how can we define an environment, and especially how can we determine that an environment is uniform or has some degree of homogeneity. And here I find interesting to try to make the presentation a bit interactive. I've seen that there is around 200 people, so it's a bit difficult to have a live discussion, but maybe just for 1 minute, try to think about what are the main characteristics to define an environment. Yeah, that's a small question for the audience, and maybe you can type a few of those characteristics in the chat box. So I let 30 seconds, 1 minute of thinking for the audience. You can think, when you think about environment, what are the main characteristics that help to characterize the environment actually. And yeah, if people want to write something in the chat box, please feel free, so we can have a bit interactive presentation, or at least I can get a bit of reaction from the audience.
Rohitji, please allow the candidates to write in the chat box as desired by Dr. Vincent Guerin. He wants an interactive session with the participants. So please allow these participants to write in the chat box.
Okay,
Yeah, if it's possible, if it's not too complicated, if people can type what kind of feature we look at when we talk about environment. Okay, we have a bit of, okay, temperature, yes. Photoperiod, soil, that sounds good. Climate, humidity, indeed soil property. Pest resistance, yes, that sounds good. Do we have people who work a bit more with the more, I would say, economic part of agriculture? Because we have a lot of very nice answer about environment, let's say a natural factor, but we can also have some factor that are not purely, let's say, natural or biophysical. Yeah, I think it's good. Let's stop for here. I've seen a lot of good answer. It's nice. I'm going to move and I take back the presentation. And indeed, so most of the characteristics have been mentioned by the people, by the audience. Indeed, if we go from what is more natural or biophysical up to something that is what I was saying at last, something that is more social, we can think in terms of soil information, very important indeed, the type of soil, the texture, water holding capacity, weather, of course, many people have mentioned, the rain, the temperature pattern, sun exposure, etc. Then we move to a bit more what the farmer are doing. So this is also very important, and this is something that needs to be taken into consideration when we try to define what is an environment. What kind of input people put? We have some region where people are more or less, let's say, can practice more or less intense type of agriculture in terms, for example, of fertilization, of irrigation, sowing date, sowing density, enter also in the management practice. And as I mentioned, the socioeconomic environment is a characteristic that can also shape a bit the environment. And I will show you after a few examples, but what you can do with the crop, how much money you can get from it, it's also something that determines a lot what people are doing or what people can do when they are making some choice. So very nice. Let's move on. So now we have listed some of those characteristics that are useful for us to, let's say, define the environment. And here I'm going to briefly mention two sources of information where we can find this type of data. And one source of information that we have used in our work is this district level database. That is a compilation of data that has been done with ICRISAT and partner. I don't remember exactly who are all the partner, but quite big work, interesting. If you don't know, I really advise you to have a look at that, because it's a database. Maybe I'm going to try to give you an overview on internet. I will try to go on the link. Yes. Do people still see my screen with the web page? Can I get a reaction if you can still see the web page, because I'm going to switch.
Yes, sir. It is visible. It is very visible.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just to show that there is this database. So you have the address here, and it's very interesting, because you have some information that have been compiled at the district level. So a very good resolution, I would say, not just state, but district level, and for really a wide spectrum of information that is related to agriculture. So in terms of crop, all types of crop are covered. And then next to that, you can have some information about the management practice. You can have some management about a bit of input, so about what people are doing. So here specific on the irrigation, some socioeconomic information like price. And yeah, I really advise you to if you don't know this, have a look to that. You can get some interesting source of information. I'm going back to the presentation. I hope you can see again my screen. Take the laser pointer. Yeah, so as I mentioned, so those district level data, very interesting source of information. And the advantage is that it's some observation. So it's not something that is a simulation. It's really something that has been observed. Of course, there is also a bit of uncertainty. And as I mentioned, very nice, let's say, resolution, because it goes up to the district level. There are a few limitations, of course, as I mentioned. As any types of data, there are some uncertainty associated to that. So this is the district level data. And from those data for pearl millets, we made an application with this. And I'm also going to switch to show you what we have done in terms of this. So it's what we call, I hope now you can see my another screen, which is my R screen. And so we have developed a program, a small program, which is an R package that is called PM app for pearl millet application. And this is something that is available online, but it's also possible to run it on your computer when you have loaded the data or the application. And this works like this. Okay. Yeah. So as I said, we have used the data that we have collected, for example, in this district level database. And this is an application for pearl millet. And it's an application to have interactive visualization of the data. For example, we have general characteristics, for example, like the area of production. And you see you have things that you can select. And for example, you can select some geographic area. Here, you can put everything. And you can see that for a selection of districts, which are the districts where most of the pearl millet is cultivated, you can have some information, for example, in terms of surface that is cultivated. And this information is plotted over a number of years of observation. So from here, you can see that, for example, for pearl millets, we observed a decreasing trend of the pearl millet cultivation in India over the last 20 years. I will come back to this application. Here, I can show that we have some information about area, but there are also some information about production, about yield pattern. Maybe I could show something here. We can see that in terms of yield, it has increased. And here again, we can have a look about the geographic distribution of the yield. And we can see that the yield increase because here we plot the trend. Maybe I'm going to put the absolute value. I'm going to put the average. So we can see something that is more in terms of average. So absolute value. We can see, for example, that area like north of Rajasthan has lower yield compared to area like the eastern part of the country. So that was just to give you a small overview of this application. I will come back to that. I'm going back to the presentation. Okay, so here. Yes, so this was an illustration of those data. And another important source of data is data about the environment. This is a very important driver of when we think about any types of crop, cultivation, etc. And so here, maybe some of you are familiar, but there is something that is called NASA Power data. And here also, there is a very, very interesting and exhaustive source of data. You can have a look to this link if you are interested, which give you synthetic data. So it means that it's some estimation, but it's based on some model that have been calibrated that can give you some weather information for any point around the globe. And if you let me, I'm also going to show how you can use that. If you are familiar with R, you can use this package, this library, which is called AppSimX, and there is another package that is called NASA Power. And with just few lines of code, you can get weather data for any point on the globe. Maybe I'm going to show you here. So I wait a bit to make sure that everyone get the right image. Maybe there is some delay with the connection. So it works like this. If you are in R, you can load those library. And then you have a function where you just need to specify what is the lat long of your position. So you can add a bit more digits because generally it's not like round number, but this is just for a small example. And then you also give the time range for which you want to get the data. And actually, when you execute this function, it takes a few seconds, but generally you see it's already there. And you can see you can get for the time range that you want for for this specific location, actually for the coordinates -9342, you can get access to some data. You can get some access to the temperature, to the rain, to the relative humidity, and to the radiation. So maybe some people already knew it, but this is quite interesting to know that nowadays with the modern tools, you can have access to quite high quality information everywhere around the globe. And I think this is something that can be very useful for any types of practitioner in agriculture. I go back to the presentation. Share again. Okay. Yes, and so this NASA power synthetic data, it's also a source of data that we have used to make this environmental characterization. I will come back to that. Now, let me introduce a bit more in depth the concept of crop model. So the idea of crop model is that it's a kind of simplified representation of a natural system, for example, a field, using a set of equations like quantitative expression that express different types of phenomenon, and those equations they sort of reflect what we know about the system with respect to different aspects, like for example soil property, weather influence on crop, different physiological mechanisms that happen in the crop. And this is for a general definition. There are different levels of complexity in crop model. There are models, for example, that have a very simple expression to express a trait, for example, like the dry weight, or let's say the biomass here. W is for the biomass. Or you also have a bit more complex algorithm where you have many sets of equations that interact together. I'm going to show an example of this. For example, software like AppSim or DSAT, and you still have more advanced, or let's say crop model that really look at just one plant and try to express any types of mechanisms that happen in a single plant that are still more complex than those intermediate crop model. And so if we zoom a bit on the concept of crop model one more time, here is an example related to AppSim. So it's a general software that allows to do some crop model simulation. So it's a set of equations you can see here. So a set of expression about what's going on in your system. There is some input. So for example, information about the weather, about the soil, about the management practice. And then this information is introduced in the system. And it is transformed by those different expressions. So for example, expression about the what we call phenological stage, so like the advancement of the time, but in terms of degree day, so in terms of degree that can be accumulated by the plant or by the biophysical process to grow. And then it goes up in complexity. There are some expression to model the canopy, so the leaf structure, then the biomass accumulation, and ultimately expression to express the yield, which is generally one of the characteristics that is the most interesting. And so you see that it can be seen like a kind of flow of information from a bit basic relationship up to something that is more complex. And this is a bit how the machinery of the crop model is functioning. And for people who are a bit more into mathematics or statistics, it's interesting to see the whole machinery of the crop model as a function that gets some input, for example, the weather, that has some parameter, and at the end that give a prediction of a trait, for example, the yield, but also it can give trait, intermediate trait, for example, the grain weight, total amount of biomass, number of days until a certain phenological state, for example, flowering, etc., etc. So just to give you a bit more flavor, I'm just going to show you a concrete example of what is a crop model. How does it work? So I will switch. I'm going to go there. And I'm going to just show you a small example of an AppSim simulation. So I hope everyone can see my screen with the AppSim simulation. So here you see, this is the crop model. So basically it's a computer program. And in this computer program, you introduce different type of information. So here, MET is weather data. Here, the format, there is a small problem, but it's fine. It's working. You have some information, for example, about the management. So, for example, when do you sow the crop? For example, which type of crop you sow here? It's an example in millet, but there is different option. Actually, you have to access them from those small toolbox. You can define, for example, one thing that is important is what is called cultivar, which is the variety. So you can see you have different choice. You can select what kind of variety. So here, this V Raj Pop is a type that is close to landrace. And you can also add some information in terms of irrigation, when irrigation is practiced. And you also have some information, for example, about the soil property, etc. And so when you have entered your different parameter, here I need to decrease a bit, you can execute the simulation. So you just click on this button and you see what I was explaining. So all those different relationships, this flow of information is running behind the screen. And at the end, you get some prediction of your characteristic. For example, we can have a look to, for example, the biomass, and you see, so each line is a day of the simulation. So it's a 1-year simulation. And you see, so this is when the plants start to grow. And you see there is some biomass that is accumulated until like the harvest that takes place there. And so here, it's not just the biomass. This is the biomass of the main stem, and then there is still some here. But okay, so this was just to give you an overview about what is a bit more concretely, what is a crop model. So I'm going to close this one. Again, sharing presentation. So those crop model actually, they are interesting because they give an opportunity to simulate what happened in a system, to get an idea, and also to, when we have a simulation tool, to be able to float some parameter without running concrete experiment, because we know that experiment, they are resource and time consuming. But before doing that, we need to make sure that the crop model give us a picture of the reality that is reliable, which means that we need to validate the crop model. And to do that, generally what we do is that we take a set of observation. It can be some experiment that have been run on the station. In the case of a TPE experiment, generally what we try to do is we try to validate the crop model given some observation at regional scale. So here, for example, we had some observation about the yield in the different districts over different years. And then what we do is that for a specific district, for example, for this place, we collect the information about the yield over different years. And then we run the simulation of the crop model to make a prediction. So estimation yield is this one. And then we try to look if the crop model give some prediction that are in line with what we have observed in the reality. And of course, we never reach 100%, but at least if we have some confidence that it goes in the same direction, at least we know that the crop model can inform us about what's going on in the system. And so when we have validated the crop model, it means that it becomes a tool that we can put in the toolbox. And there are different types of usage that we can do. And here again, I would like to let the audience to think for maybe 1 minute. If you think about crop model, and if you based on what I've mentioned, what kind of usage you could do from such a tool. Try to think about if you have a tool that gives you the opportunity to predict what could be the yield or the behavior of your crop given certain condition, how you could use that to support your decision or to help you in your work. And if you have some idea, please again write them in the chat, and then we come back to the answer. This one is maybe a bit more tricky than the previous one. So okay, I see that there is not necessarily many answers about how the crop model can be used. If you have some idea, please still feel free to write them. Otherwise, I'm going to move. So maybe you have thought in your mind about some application, but here it's not an exhaustive list, but at least it's few application. When we have this type of prediction tool, actually, it's very useful for many applications. For example, in plant breeding, when you know that the tool can reflect with a good level of confidence what can happen in the reality, you can try to modify some parameter to see how your crop would behave given some change without having to run the experiment by yourself. So you are going to simulate a new condition, for example, a new management practice. And this could give you, for example, for plant breeder, if you have a new variety, or let's say if you can think about new condition for the future, you could try to see what kind of plant, because you also have some characteristics, some parameters that are related to the genotype, what kind of trait you will need to develop for future condition. That's one application. More generally, in terms of agronomy, you can simulate new management practice. What happens if you give extra fertilizer? What happens if you advise, for example, to make border wider, smaller? So this is something that can be learned from crop model. If you are socioeconomist, you can run these similar types of simulation also to try to predict what happen in the future given some climatic scenario. If you have a bit some information about the selling, you can connect the economic information to the crop model to understand, to make some economic prediction of your system. And for example, if you're in industry, you can also try to make some prediction about what will be the condition to meet a certain level of production. Many times, before you can start to do some marketing of the crop or some transformation, you need to reach a certain level of production. And here, by simulation, you can explore what kind of, let's say, modification you can introduce in your system to meet those, for example, industry condition, basic one, a certain amount of production. And policymaker, of course, all those type of, let's say, guideline, we can think of them about in terms of policy. If you need to design a new policy for a certain crop or certain region, you could also use the crop model, at least to support your decision. So here, I'm going to show you another small example how it functions, how the crop model function in reality. So from the same application that I showed before, okay, this one, I hope that people can still see my screen like this. So, and here in this application, there is also a part that is based on crop model prediction. And here, I would like to show you concretely what can be done, what kind of information we can get from a crop model. So let's assume we are interested about the agronomy of pearl millet in Rajasthan. So here, I'm going to select Rajasthan because for pearl millet, it's the place where most of the production is happening. And here, let's assume that I'm district officer, or I want to advise farmers. And here in this application, we have put two screens where we can set up a simulation for a crop model, and then we can compare the output of the option 1 and option 2. So first, I'm going to put the condition to be close to what could happen in Rajasthan. So generally, we have some soil that have low water content, so close to sandy soil. They are shallow soil, rather shallow soil. Generally, people are cultivating landrace. They are sowing not too early, not too late, so we can here keep the average time. Generally, the density of sowing is it's rather low density. People don't use irrigation, and people use low fertilization. So we put no fertilization. So here, based on this set of conditions, the crop model is calculating some information, for example, for the yield for those different districts. And here, what is interesting to do, if we want to simulate a new type of condition, let's try to investigate, is it interesting to move from a landrace to a commercial hybrid? So in the option 2, now I'm going to select this option. We have made the simulation for this specific pearl millet hybrid 9444. And here you can see between option 1 and option 2, the level of yield has increased. And here you can observe, this is a map about the difference. And you see it's generally a good choice if you move from the landrace to the hybrid, at least according to the model. And you would get some advantage, but mostly in the southern part. So you would benefit from the hybrid switch, but mostly in regions that are a bit more in the south. Those regions generally have a bit more favorable condition, a bit more rain. So this was a small illustration just to illustrate an application of this crop model. Yes, I go back to the presentation. And so now I'm back to the presentation. I'm going to illustrate another application, which is this definition of the target population of environment. And so we are back to the question that I introduced at the beginning. For breeding or for other types of activity, it's useful to know what environment, what zone of a country of the world share similar characteristics, because then we can define them as an environment. So the definition of a target population of an environment is to determine uniform environment. And this is an activity that should be done on a regular basis. For example, for pearl millet, it has been started in the 90s or the 80s. I don't remember by heart, but we know that from the 90s to now, many things have been changed, especially in terms of weather, in terms of practice, in terms of socioeconomic practice, what the farmer are growing. And so we need to actualize this TPE. And so this is a kind of a bit outdated starting point, because what is used now is 3 zones. So there is a A1, A and B, but the original one is 2 zone. And so in our work, we have tried to revise this target population of environment definition to recharacterize the different environments that are used for permeate cultivation. And so for that, we have gathered some information about the district where permeate is cultivated. So those are the district with color are the place where most of the cultivation happen. And this is what I showed before. So we have collected information about the observation, what we have in this district level database, information about the weather, and also information that we can derive from the crop model. So you see for each district, we have 62 districts. We have collected information about district level database, some information about the surface, about the production, about the yield, about irrigation, what people are doing, information about the weather, and also some parameter that we have extracted from the crop model. So after running the simulation, we can collect some data to complement the source of information that we have. And with this, we are going to do what we call the principal component analysis. So this is a small illustration about how the principal component analysis is working. So each district is defined by a set of information, as I showed before. So a number of variables, actually around 25, that describe a bit what's going on in each of those districts in terms of surface cultivated, in terms of irrigation, fertilization, etc., etc. And so there is a statistical technique called principal component analysis that actually make a summary of this information, and that summary all the information in 2 dimensions. So here 2 axes, PC1, PC2, and the closer the dots are, the more similar they are. And based on this, let's say, plotting of those different dots, after the calculation of those principal components, we can determine that the dots that are close to each other means that it's district or region that are similar to each other. And based on that, we determine different set of environments. And so here you can see 4 cluster, 4 environments. This is the result that we have obtained for pearl millet. We have run the principal component analysis with 3 clusters, 4 clusters, 5 clusters. So we have fixed this number. And here, the different color mean that different regions belong to a different environment. And so after we have determined each of those regions, we can look at what are the characteristics that, let's say, what make those regions, for example, this region here, different from this one. And here, I'm going to give you a brief overview about the permeate landscape, because this is the example that I know the most. I'm mostly worked on this in this case study. We have one region here that is called A1 previously, in the previous classification, that mostly stay the same. It's a place where there is a harsh environment, rain is low, cultivation has decreased over the last 20 years, but permeate stay dominant. Why? Because in this place, there are not too many alternatives. You can cultivate permeate, but there is not too much other crop that can resist to those harsh conditions. So permeate still remain dominant. Those are data for the rainy season. So for Kharif season, we have focused on the Kharif season. Another region is what we have called AE1. Actually, this part here in the previous classification was one uniform place, but with the new data, we can be a bit more precise, a bit more granular, and we can divide up to 3 different environments. So the first TPE, AE1, is the place where there is most of the cultivation. 39% of the production in terms of production, 39% overall on average over the last 20 years of the permillet is produced in this place. They have experienced important yield increase around 45, 50 kg per hectare and per year. So very, very impressive. There is this region that I used to call previously in some previous presentation a successful zone, because it's the place where a lot of change have happened, and it's a place where people have succeeded to increase a lot their production and a lot their yield. So it's a place that has been very interesting for permillet cultivation in the last 20 years. And the hypothesis is that people have invested in terms of input, in terms of irrigation, and potentially also in terms of new variety, and they have obtained some quite good success, and they were helped by good weather condition and a good soil characteristics. Two last zones are this one, the district that fall in Gujarat. It's a place where permillet surface has decreased. It's a place where potentially some permillet has been transferred to summer season. Important feature. And it's a place characterized by a high rain variability, which could have different types of effect on permillet cultivation. It could either, when the condition become too difficult, when there is too much water, or I mean too erratic pattern in terms of water, so too high intensity of water, people could switch the production to summer season, or also if there is more water, people could move to a bit more profitable crop, for example, cotton or castor bean. And the last one, B zone, a zone where that has experienced a sharp decline. It's a place where there is a huge concurrence, many alternatives to permillet, like cotton, like maize, and according to us, or to what we have seen, or the hypothesis that we have, is that cotton or maize are crop with a higher profitability. So here, this has driven a lot a decrease in the permillet cultivation in that area. Maybe later you can give me your opinion on that. If there are some permillet specialists, for us it's interesting to confirm or infirm if our hypotheses are correct. So that was an illustration of this target population of environment definition. And the last part of the presentation, so still 3 slides before we start a bit to discuss. Based on this information, we can get some useful information to be used for the current practice. One is to locate where are the testing sites and to see if they cover well the different area. And here we can see, for example, that there are some testing sites that are that don't fall in the, let's say, in the main production region that could be reallocated. We can also see that some regions are well covered while others are not necessarily well covered. So this, after we have done this work, we can use this information to reallocate the resource. And the last one, I don't know if it's possible to do this, but as I showed before, maybe we could try to do this, but if the interaction, if there is too many people, maybe it's a bit too difficult. But as I showed with the tool, when we have the crop model information and the information about the different environment, we can try to investigate what kind of modification we could introduce in the crop model. So we know that, for example, Rajasthan is a place that is characterized by harsh conditions, and we could use the tool to try to test different options that could help to support the increase of yield or let's say support the farmer for their cultivation in that area. And so with this, I'm done, and I'm happy to answer some question, any types of question that you have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Garin. We were patiently hearing your experiences and your expertise. Now I'm inviting the participants to please put up your questions in the chat box so that Dr. Garin may please answer those. The first question is, I request you, sir, to please brief out how TPE plays a specific role in precision agriculture and how it can be utilized by common farmers.
Okay, so let's say for me, the main advantage of the TP exercise, and especially crop model. So crop model and TP is not exactly the same, but TP at least help to give, let's say, a common definition of what is the environment. And based on this, we can investigate the solution that can be put in place for precision agriculture. And I think one of the, let's say, feature of precision agriculture is that more and more we get very specific information about weather, about what's happening in the environment. And if we use the crop model and we put this information on the top of the environment that we have defined, we can, without testing, because it costs a lot of resource, at least we can shrink a number of options that look interesting from the simulation, and then only those options that looks interesting from the simulation point of view, put them in place. And this is a bit what I've tried to show with the small example, the comparison between cultivating a land race versus cultivating a variety that is more commercial hybrid.
The next question, Dr. Garin. Sir, how can CM technology be helpful in integrated pest management?
So for pest management, I have to say that so far there is not too much integration of the pest component in the crop model. It's an area that starts to grow, but we hope in the future that there is a better, let's say that pest stress is better taken into consideration in the crop model. And if such an interaction, it needs some interaction between the people who develop the model and the entomologists. If such an interaction is fruitful, then again, we will be able to simulate the effect of different management strategy in the computer to be able to, let's say, come with guidelines and some guidelines that could be implemented at the larger scale.
Okay. Dr. Garin, a lot of appreciation pouring in for the nice presentation, and the participants wants your PPT, which will definitely be sharing with all of them. One of the comments that one of the participant has put in the chat box is some open resource R software packages for crop modeling. Kindly comment on that, sir.
Yes, actually there is, if you work with DSAT, there is a full version of DSAT available in R, which is very practical. Actually, for example, when I worked with crop model, I use as much as possible R to interact with AppSim. So far, I'm not sure if with AppSim there is a full version of AppSim available in R, but you can run AppSim from R. And DSAT and AppSim are not the only option. There are really a huge variety of crop model, from very basic one to complex one. And I know that many of them have been programmed in R, but at least a DSAT for sure you can run it from R.
Another question, Dr. Garin. Are crop modeling simulation models available? to study present day weather and take a decision for farmers to go ahead?
Yeah, actually, according to me, but I have not worked with all types of crop model, but according to me, in almost all crop model, or at least all model that simulate field, the weather is a central component. And so a common application is to simulate future scenario, for example, scenario that could be that could happen in the next 10, 20, 50 years in terms of weather pattern, and then to look for those different scenarios, what are the output of the simulation in terms of yield, in terms of what you can get with the crop. And based on this, you can experience, or you can get an idea about what could happen in future if the weather scenario that you have simulated happens. So it's also conditional on the realization of this simulation, which can be a bit tricky. And on the top of this, you can add some different management scenario to see if you can mitigate the negative effect of what you are simulating in terms of weather.
Another question, Dr. Garan. Have you used the simulation to tap the stay green trait of pearl millet? And does the simulation prove successful of a crop on a location before growing in the farmer's plot?
Alors, myself not. I've not I've not played too much with the crop components, not at all in terms of pearl millet. I think the pearl millet model that are available still need a bit of improvement to reach that. But I know that some people have done this type of work in sorghum, if I'm correct. And I think some people have been able to give few guidelines about what kind of trait could be developed, but I'm not 100% sure. I could check for some reference.
Dr. Garan, another question your way. How CM can help in determining and predicting the nutritional quality?
What CM can? What is CM can?
How CM can help in determining and predicting the nutritional quality?
CM, you mean like crop model?
Yes, yes.
Okay, nutritional
Predicting the
quality.
nutritional quality.
I have to say that so far I have not seen personally, but of course my knowledge is limited. I don't know everything what is developed in crop model. I have not seen application where people are focusing on traits that are related to nutrition, for example, like micronutrient content. I think it's still some characteristic that are not simulated by crop model, or at least not the mainstream one. And maybe in the future it will be possible to go at that level, but so far I have not seen example, but it can exist. But I'm not sure.
So this means this is an area which we can work on. The nutritional quality is an avenue which should be looked into for further research.
Yes.
Yeah. So another question, sir. Which varieties of pearl millet are recommended in saline alkali soils in India, especially in UP near Lucknow? It's in northern part of India, and he's asking about some pearl millet varieties which can be grown in saline alkali soils.
Okay. So let's say what we have seen in the simulation in UP, at least probably in the southern part of UP, because I'm not sure if we have covered the district that this person is talking about, but the southern part is a place where conditions are relatively good. But if this person is talking about saline soil, means that it's probably something that is more harsh condition. Then let's say my advice would be to run some simulation, because I haven't done any simulation for this specific configuration, and then I will be able to give something a bit more precise. One condition on that, in the actual version of the crop model, we have 3 to 4 genotype that are programmed. So the diversity of possibility, we have the landrace, we have 9444, we have HHB 67. So the best would be to try to run the simulation for this specific location, which is possible to do. It's take a bit of time, but for those 3 options, and to see based on the data what come out.
Okay. So one of the comments from one of the participants is integrated CM has been developed for common use in precision agriculture. Integrated CM.
Integrated with what? I don't know if the person can be a bit more precise about. Let's say, for example, I know that crop model is used. An application, for example, is for insurance mechanism. For example, I know some people have developed tools where the crop model is a central component, or at least an important component, where based on the crop model simulation plus other information, for example, satellite imagery, or let's say people have tried to develop, let's say, advice mechanism or support mechanism in terms of insurance, to determine a bit upfront what kind of risk you could get to have a crop failure, or at least to get a bit more information about this. And this can be used, I don't know if it's already used for crop insurance. So maybe this is an example of integration of crop model. I don't know if it's answered the question, but.
Okay. Up to what level of soil reaction can we say pH or and EC pearl millet crop can tolerate?
So for this type of very specific parameter, I have to say that this is something that we have not simulated.
Yeah.
It's possible. It would be possible to do that. It would need to do really, let's say, to zoom on the soil component of the simulation, and after defining, let's say, different types of soil that vary because of your parameter, which seems to be pH, then you could try to assess what is the influence of that parameter on pearl millet.
A lot of appreciation coming your way, Dr. Vincent Guerin. People have appreciated the effort you took in your trials and telling about in this presentation, and people liked your presentation very much. One of the comment is integrated CM with respect to all POP for targeted crop. Okay. So most of the people are looking forward for a successful integrated model in precision agriculture. So can you, sir, share your email ID?
Yeah, I can share my email ID. It's, maybe I can. I will put it in the chat box. Yes, this is this is my email ID.
Yeah. Thank you. So people who are wanting to have a more detailed questioning session may send their respective queries. Please write in your subject line that the query was based on precision agriculture session. And thank you, Dr. Vincent Guerin, for patiently hearing the question from the participants in India. They were patiently hearing, and a lot of comments have poured in, and they've appreciated your presentation also. We look forward to have you in further sessions. And it was very nice because this is the International Year of Millets, and you have shown the data on pearl millet. That was a very relevant thing from your end also. And we'll be looking forward to have your inputs in the millet conference, which is scheduled in the later months of this year at CSJMU Kanpur University too. So we are inviting you in advance, and we'll definitely have you on board for that conference also. So thank you, sir. And any other further questions may be addressed to Dr. Ankur Sharma or Dr. Vincent Garin in particular. So thank you for your expertise and sharing this research experience with all the participants. Thanks a lot. And participants will be joining at this time tomorrow at 6:30 sharp. So please be on board with us, and we'll be hearing another very relevant lecture. These lectures scheduled this week is from people and scientists from connected to ICRISAT. So please join with us and enrich yourself in your knowledge domain. Thanks a lot. We'll be signing up, and have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.